Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I served in the military for over a decade, including time in special operations. After years of being stationed all over, I finally got an assignment near my hometown. My wife and I moved there with our two boys, a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. We thought it would be great to be close to family, but we weren't prepared for what that actually meant. Both sets of grandparents, especially the grandmothers, had barely seen their grandkids since they were born. They were constantly at our house for the first couple of months. It was finally starting to calm down when this incident happened. I should mention that my mother is different. I rarely call home, not because I don't love my parents, but because I just don't feel the need to talk unless I have something important to say. My mother's typical calls usually involve her greeting me and asking what I'm doing. When I tell her nothing, she'll bring up some random person from my childhood that I don't remember. She'll insist that I must remember them, usually citing some insignificant moment like them sitting behind me at an assembly. Then she'll tell me they died. This happens constantly. I've talked to her maybe 20 times in the last decade, and somehow at least 10 people I've never heard of have died. One Saturday, my wife was working her shift as an ICU nurse, and I was home with the kids. I had just fed them breakfast and put on their favorite cartoon while I took a quick shower. When I came back, my 2-year-old was missing. I searched every inch of our 3,200 square foot house. Multiple times. I asked my 6-year-old where his brother was, but he just shrugged. After the 10th sweep, I was panicking. I had to call my wife and tell her I couldn't find our toddler. She understandably freaked out. After one final unsuccessful search, I had to call the police. When I called 911, the operator asked about my emergency. I had to tell her I'd lost my son. She asked for clarification, and I explained that I'd taken a shower and now my 2-year-old was missing. While giving the operator more details, I noticed a car pulling up through our bay window. It was my mother, and there, sitting in her car, was my missing 2-year-old. I quickly told the operator I'd found him and ended the call. Then I stormed outside. I yelled at my mother, demanding to know what she was doing. She casually replied that she'd just gone to the grocery store. When I pointed out she had taken my child, she acted like it was perfectly normal, saying she'd stopped by and asked if the boys wanted to go, and the little one had agreed. When I accused her of stealing my kid, she denied it, saying she'd told my older son to tell me. I couldn't believe she'd expected a 6-year-old watching cartoons to relay such an important message. Her response was even more shocking. She claimed that being a grandmother gave her the right to take him whenever she wanted. When I told her that was kidnapping, she just brushed it off, saying she'd just taken him. The conversation went nowhere. She was completely oblivious to how serious this was, but I wasn't done. The next day, she called asking when I'd drop the kids off. Perfect opportunity. I asked her to watch the kids at our house instead, claiming our new dog needed someone there. Once she arrived, I went to her house. I reorganized everything. The entire living room furniture was rearranged. Pictures were hung upside down. In the kitchen, I put plates in the bathroom and toilet paper in the kitchen drawers. I moved everything except for what was in her bedroom. As a final touch, I took every single remote control in the house. The phone call started that evening. First, she called asking if I'd been at the house, thinking they'd been robbed. I confirmed I had been there. I could hear my father in the background asking about the remote. She called again, this time asking about her pots and pans and questioning why there was toilet paper in the kitchen. My father was still demanding to know where the remote was in the background. Finally, she said she was coming over. When she arrived, I made my terms clear. She needed to apologize for kidnapping my child and promised never to do it again if she wanted the remotes back. She tried to deny it at first, but when I stood my ground about keeping the remotes, she finally apologized and promised not to do it again. She then asked about dropping off the kids the next day, but I told her she should come to our house until she figured out where all her kitchen stuff was. She finally learned her lesson, though it took rearranging her entire house to get there. My dad eventually got his remotes back, and she never took the kids without asking again. I've been living between my parents' houses since their divorce 3 years ago. It's not bad. I actually get double the gaming time since both of them got me an Xbox to keep me entertained. The only catch is that I need physical copies of games to play them at both places, since digital copies are locked to one console. Gaming isn't huge in Switzerland where I live. Most people here are into PlayStation, so finding Xbox games can be tricky. I've been saving up for the new basketball game that just came out, and my mom gave me her credit card as an early birthday present to buy it. When I got to the game store, I was relieved to see they still had one copy left for Xbox. These stores usually only stock about 5 copies for Xbox compared to dozens for PlayStation, so I got lucky. I grabbed it right away and headed to the checkout counter. While waiting for the cashier, I noticed a woman and her son, probably around 11 or 12, walk in. The kid went straight to where I'd found the game and came back looking disappointed. Next thing I knew, they were both walking toward me. The mother approached me and asked if I would be willing to sell them the game since it was the last copy. She even offered me an extra $25 for it. I politely declined and suggested they could buy it digitally using a gift card from the store instead. She then tried to convince me by saying it was her son's birthday next week and repeated her offer of extra money. Again, I had to refuse, explaining that I was about to buy it. The cashier finally showed up and I handed over my mom's credit card to pay. That's when things got crazy. The woman started screaming, accusing me of stealing her credit card from her purse. She was yelling so loud that a security guard came running over. The security guard asked what was happening, and the woman immediately claimed I was a thief, pointing out that it was a woman's card and couldn't be mine. I explained that it was my mom's card given to me as a birthday gift and suggested they could call her to verify. The security guard told me to step aside while he contacted the card holder. During the wait, the woman wouldn't stop ranting about how I was a thief and how her son deserved the game more than me. The security guard called my mom, who was understandably angry about having to leave work. When she arrived 15 minutes later, she was ready for battle. My mom demanded to know what was going on and stated that it was her credit card, which she had given to me as a birthday gift. She proved it by showing her ID matching the name on the card. After the security guard verified everything, he confronted the woman about her false theft accusation. The woman tried to defend herself by complaining about her son's need for the game and calling me selfish. The store manager then stepped in, explaining that making false theft accusations was against store policy. He told her that she was banned from the location and would have to leave. The security guard added that they would call the police for filing a false report if she didn't leave immediately. The woman's face turned bright red as she grabbed her son's arm and stormed out. The manager apologized and even gave me a discount on the game for the trouble. My mom took the rest of the afternoon off and we went for ice cream to calm down. She told me the store manager called her later to say the woman had tried to come back the next day and was arrested for trespassing. The game was totally worth all the drama though. I've already logged dozens of hours on both consoles. I'm a 34-year-old medical researcher, and watching my mother transform from the woman who raised me into what she is today has been nothing short of heartbreaking. She was different, strict but caring, always pushing me to excel in my studies. My father balanced her intensity with his calm demeanor. They were the perfect team. But something changed after I left for college. Maybe it was empty nest syndrome. Or perhaps this side of her was always there, dormant. The first red flags appeared during my residency. The constant calls, the guilt-tripping, the emotional manipulation. I tried setting boundaries, but they crumbled under her relentless neediness. After completing my residency, I moved back to my hometown to be closer to my parents, hoping it would help. Instead, it made everything worse. Last year, I decided to give our relationship another chance. Big mistake. Even the simplest outings became exercises in patience. Take our recent Costco trip, for instance. When I told her I would pick her up at 2, she insisted I come earlier and demanded to bring Princess along. When I explained that her dog didn't need to come to Costco, she turned to the dog and told it to tell its sister to stop being mean. Yes, she calls me by her dog's name and the dog by my name. It's not a slip of the tongue, she does it consistently. The Bichon Frise goes everywhere with her, even places where dogs aren't allowed. At Costco, she created a scene when her cart got tangled with another shopper's. When the other shopper politely offered to help untangle the carts, my mother refused and simply announced she would take the other person's cart instead. She proceeded to drag the poor woman's cart down the entire aisle, ignoring both my and the shopper's protests. I wanted to disappear into the ground. Just yesterday, I was trying to book a massage for my back pain. When I was in the middle of scheduling my appointment over the phone, my mother grabbed the phone from my hand and demanded 2 appointments, asking if her princess could come along because the dog gets anxious when alone. The receptionist was speechless. I had to end the call and apologize later. Her paranoia has reached new heights. She installed Ring doorbells inside her own house, in the hallways. She refuses to step outside after dark, convinced someone's waiting to attack her. But her entitlement and self-centeredness reached their peak during my father's final days. Dad had been battling lymphoma for months. His doctors were clear. He needed constant monitoring. That night, she knew he only had days left. Instead of staying with him, she left him alone for 14 hours. 14 hours! He collapsed just 2 hours after she left. For 12 agonizing hours, my father lay on the floor, unable to reach help. In the emergency room, the doctor explicitly told her that my father's condition was critical and that chest compressions could be fatal. They advised her to spend these final moments with him and to inform them immediately to prevent any interventions. What did she do? Spent 3 hours calling her friends, asking them what they thought she should do, whether she should let the doctors try, and what they would do in her situation. Because of her indecision, hospital policy kicked in. They had to perform chest compressions. His lungs collapsed. He died alone while she was still on the phone. This wasn't the first time her behavior cost precious minutes in an emergency. Back in 2014, when Dad had a stroke, she called me first instead of emergency services. She described how strange he was acting and that he couldn't speak properly, asking me what she should do. When I urged her to call 911 immediately, she hesitated, wondering if it was nothing and suggesting she should wait. Even after I yelled at her to call 911 right away, she waited another 20 minutes before calling emergency services. Now she has the audacity to blame me for everything. According to her, it's my fault for focusing on my career instead of being their full-time caretaker. Apparently, as the only child, I should have somehow predicted my father's collapse and been there. The irony? She hasn't called once since his funeral to check on me. Last week, I finally reached my breaking point. I hired a lawyer and gained power of attorney over all medical and financial decisions. I've arranged for professional caregivers to check on her daily, and I've blocked her number. Her friends can deal with her endless calls now. The mother I knew is gone, replaced by this entitled, paranoid woman who can't even remember to call me by my own name. Sometimes I wonder if she ever truly existed, or if this was always who she was, waiting to emerge. Either way, I've made peace with my decision to step away. My father's death taught me that life is too short to be held hostage by toxic relationships, even if they're family. My parents had me when they were just 16. We immigrated to this country when I was young, leaving most of our family behind. I always felt like an unwanted burden, the mistake that forced 2 teenagers to grow up too fast. They made sure I knew it too, not through words, but through their constant emotional absence. When my middle brother was born, I was 13. Despite our age gap, we formed an incredible bond. I basically raised him during his early years while our parents were always busy. When I left for college at 18, it broke my heart to leave him behind, but I promised to stay in touch through letters. Those letters became our lifeline over the years. Then came our youngest brother, a surprise addition when I was 23. I only met him briefly as a baby before distancing myself from my parents' toxic household. Still, I made sure to keep writing to my middle brother, sending him birthday gifts and holiday cards, staying connected however I could. Fast forward to now, I'm 28, married, with a 5-year-old daughter. We live comfortably, and I've built the stable family life I never had growing up. Then came the call that changed everything. My middle brother called me in a panic, his voice shaking as he explained that our parents had been gone for almost 5 months. He told me he was alone taking care of our little brother and didn't know what to do anymore. When I asked where our parents were, he explained that they were supposedly traveling for work and would send money sometimes. He broke down as he told me that at 15 he was missing school to take care of our little brother, and he couldn't handle it anymore. My blood ran cold. I immediately offered to pick them both up for a sleepover, making sure we had parental permission via text to avoid any kidnapping accusations. When I arrived at my childhood home, my heart shattered. My 15-year-old brother looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. My 5-year-old brother, who I barely knew, was wearing clothes that were clearly unwashed. The transition to my house went smoother than expected. My daughter immediately took to her uncle, despite him being the same age. That night, after the little ones were asleep, my middle brother finally broke down. Through his tears, he described how exhausted he was from having to make meals, help with baths, handle dressing, and keep our youngest brother entertained. He admitted he hadn't been to school in weeks because the daycare wouldn't take the little one without parent signatures, and as a result, he was failing everything. When I asked why he hadn't told me sooner, he sobbed while explaining that our parents had always taught him that asking for help was a sign of weakness, and he didn't want to be a burden. That was the moment I knew I had to act. I contacted Child Protective Services through a friend who works there. The investigation moved slowly, but it moved. My brothers had to return home temporarily while the case was processed, but I was told they'd either go to a relative or into the system. Being the only relative in the country, I immediately volunteered to take them. That's when the storm hit. My phone exploded with calls from relatives back home. My first aunt called to berate me for betraying the family, insisting that my parents had worked hard to give me everything. The second aunt accused me of trying to steal their children and warned that they could get deported if Child Protective Services investigated them. Even my college friends weighed in, warning me to think about what I was doing. They cautioned that I could ruin my parents' lives, causing them to lose their jobs and immigration status. But I couldn't back down. Not when I remembered my brother's exhausted face. Not when I thought about my 5-year-old brother being cared for by a teenager. The final straw came when my parents finally returned home after nearly 6 months away. When confronted, my mother tried to defend their actions by saying they were working to provide for the children and asked what else they were supposed to do. I responded by suggesting they could have been actual parents or hired a caregiver instead of abandoning their children for months. My father attempted to justify their behavior by pointing out that they had left money and food. I reminded them that a 15-year-old shouldn't have to be a parent and that their actions had caused him to fail school. My mother then accused me of destroying our family and taking their children away. I told her that they had already destroyed the family when they decided their children weren't worth staying for. The case concluded last week. I was granted full custody of both brothers. My parents are facing charges of child abandonment and neglect. Some family members still won't speak to me, but I sleep better knowing my brothers are safe. My middle brother is catching up in school with tutoring, and my youngest brother is finally experiencing what it's like to have stability in his life. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.